Alright, so in this video, we're going to be testing Polylute versus Charged Perforator, the new Void item. This is what the effect looks like, and then of course there's Charged Perforator. So starting off with Polylute, you can see with 3 stacks it spawns 9 of them because of the way it stacks. It doesn't stack damage, but instead it stacks the counts of the lightning. So here's the 3 poly test. Polylute, and I'm going to speed it up actually. So about 22 seconds there. And another important note for overloading our Charged Perforator is that it doesn't stack proc chance, it only stacks the total damage. So something like this can happen, where even though it's a 1.0 proc coefficient and a 10% chance, I fired 21 shots. Here's the perforator test. It's definitely procking a lot more than last time, and keep in mind this is going to be 1500% or 15 times damage here. So a little shorter, about 12 seconds it looks like. So for this next one, without hitting sweet spot, as you can tell, it multiplies by exactly 15. An important note is that total damage is not affected by proc coefficient. And in this one, it does sweet spot, hits the weak spot, but this math actually doesn't make any sense. So I reached out to literally Europe to try and get some help with this, and at first I thought that this would have been the answer, but the math still actually doesn't add up, because in the previous shot the base damage was 450, and this is the same railgunner level, same time scaling and everything, so the math just yeah, we couldn't figure that one out, but that's okay. So going back to Polylute, this is with hitting the sweet spot. This math again doesn't make any sense at all, with the base damage being 434.4, which is again different from the other two. So basically, as you can tell, it goes 450, then 600, then 434.4, then 400. But there's something I haven't talked about yet, and that's the proc chain. So both Perforator and Polylute have their own proc coefficient, with Polylute being 3 times the 0.2. Each strike is a 0.2, and then overloading being a solid 1.0. So for this test, I'm going to show through math the difference between the two. So we're going to assume I'm hitting 100 shots of Railgunner M1 with a 1.0 proc coefficient. And as far as damage goes, it's going to proc 25 times from the Polylute, times 1.8. That's the 60 times 3. It comes out to 180% total damage. But what's interesting is that even though the Perforator had a higher damage, the proc DPS is actually lower because of the proc rate of the Polylute being higher. So it comes out to a 175 proc DPS difference. Now with 2 stacks, there's an even bigger difference between the two. It's going to be 10 instead of 5. And the reason, even with 1 more stack, the difference is so big in the proc DPS is because when Polylute stacks, not only does it increase the number of lightning bolts, that technically increases the total damage, while the Perforator proc chance stays the same. So moving on to Railgunner Supercharged shot, this one there's a little bit of different math involved, because you have to take into account the 3.0 proc coefficient and the fact that it's a 4000% shot, and I'm only doing 1 of them instead of 100. So now after I adjust the equation from earlier to fit 1 shot and I fill in the rest, it still has a pretty significant difference, with Polylute being the winner, and also the fact that every additional stack just puts further distance between them in terms of proc DPS. However, you could simply run into a case where overloading procs an ATG and it does 18,000%. So this is just what I called the bundled test. I added a few on-hit effects. I started out with Polylute, and it increases pretty quick, under 6 seconds there. I did it again just for consistency's sake, and it took about the same amount of time, about 6 seconds. And then here it is with overloading, and this is kind of what I was talking about. The rest of it just gets deleted really quickly. On the other hand, you're just as likely to have this happen, where nothing procs off the overloading, and it takes even longer than all 3 of the other ones. So in the end, if you're curious which one wins, it doesn't matter. One's a void item, one's a boss item. They're both really strong with good total damage and procs. Just pick them both up and you'll have a good run. That's about it. See ya.